Hello, and
Hello.
welcome to our podcast. My name is Becky Harper,
I'm Rachel Jones.
and we're going to be talking about the psychology behind some film industry things. So, specifically, I am really interested in horror movies and scary movies, so I really wanted to learn more about the psychology behind horror movies. And so I just kind of started off with some questions that I figured most people would be curious about, that I was curious about, and figured that would be like an easy way to get more information about horror movies, you know?
And I'd like to note that neither of us know what the other person wrote.
Yeah,
So we are just completely, showcasing this.
hearing it all for the first time. Okay, well, the first general question I came up with is why do people want to watch horror movies in the first place? Because there's people that really enjoy watching horror movies, and then there's some people that are like, why do you just enjoy being scared all the time?
Yeah, that's me. I don't understand it, but
Oh
you're
my
the
gosh.
first person.
Well, it's actually okay, so this is one of the first things that I picked out because it made so much sense with me. So there's this thing called an excitation transfer, which the Google definition is when you have a period of arousal and then you have a feeling after that arousal that's amplified or stronger than it would have naturally been without the previous arousal. And the way this works in horror movies is you get freaked out, there's a jump scare, or there's a really, really on edge scene where you're just okay, and it's the relief you feel afterwards. It's that wash of relief that people just really enjoy feeling, that's more amplified than it would have been if you weren't freaking out a second ago over seeing a killer clown. And I mean, that's not excitation transfer isn't something that's just specific to horror movies, because I mean people use it in all types of genres, but that was one thing that specifically people do enjoy about horror movies.
I guess an action too, oh, this person's gonna die. But
Well, there is an
Ooh.
example I actually found of action movies as well. So the hero and the villain at the beginning of the movie get into a scuffle, and everybody's gosh, that villain is so terrible. I hate them. They're just the worst, as a villain typically is. But later in the movie, when the hero's getting revenge or putting the villain in jail or something, it's just so much more satisfying for the viewer because of that previous encounter that they had. So it really is something that's used in a lot of different movie genres, I guess. Anyways, so a lot of horror movies will trigger somebody's fight or flight response. And this is where it's going to lead into the next question that I asked, because I was a lot of people really, really do not like watching scary movies. Is it bad for a person's mental health? Will it have negative effects on you? Is if you become self-aware and you don't feel comfortable where you are, whether you're home alone and you're I'm not really comfortable being home alone, or you're with people that you don't really know all that well, you might be I'm not extremely comfortable in the moment. So it's stuff like that, and just obviously the general if you have a lot of anxiety about a certain thing, that could be amplified. You could have more panic about a situation. And I mean, there's I'm gonna cut this out in a minute because so there's a lot of other effects other than just obviously being afraid right up front. It's a lot of people won't be able to sleep after a scary movie, which obviously is not going to be great for your mental health. You're going to be tired, and whether it's just not being able to fall asleep or waking up from a nightmare, then you would be interrupting your REM sleep, and it's just you wake up feeling tired, and then the next day it's just bleh.
Yeah.
And then after that question, I was kind of well, this makes horror movies sound really bad, And I thought this was going to be a stretch when I wrote it down, but I genuinely wanted to know, are there any positive, can watching horror movies be good for your mental health? Which, see, it sounds like a stretch, right?
Yeah, it seems overall it should have a more negative effect. I don't know. In my opinion, just because I hate horror movies so much, I can't watch them. So in my opinion, I'd be like, horror movies are awful. Like, don't.
No, okay. So, like, I was thinking the same thing, and I'm someone who enjoys horror movies. So I was like, okay, well, what do these people who have done studies on, like, scary movies and horror movies and, like, how people react to them, like, what do they have to say about it? And, like, if you're not somebody who's extremely anxious or, like, dislikes watching horror movies, because, I mean, obviously that's not going to have a really good effect on your mental health.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody who doesn't mind watching horror movies, I mean, there's a lot of, like, physical benefits of it. Like, I thought this was so funny. I was looking at one source, and it was like, you can burn up to, like, well, not like most people, but there was one study that they did where a participant was, like, watching The Shining, and they burned up to, like, 200 calories watching The Shining. And these are more, like, physical benefits. At the moment, I know I said, I kind of, like, jumped around and swipped questions, you know? Swipped. I don't know. Okay, so... I might chug that and just...
No.
No, just, like, that last section, because I was supposed to jump into, like, mental health, and I jumped into physical.
No.
It's okay. Okay, so a lot of anxious people have therapists, and you probably should if it's really a problem.
Yeah.
Would recommend.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, if you're, like, that anxious that it's affecting you all the time, definitely probably see somebody about it. But a lot of, I'm not going to say a lot, but there are a number of therapists who will recommend people using horror movies as kind of like an exposure therapy.
Oh.
And you wouldn't, like, ever want to do this without talking to somebody, like, a professional first. Like, if you're just like, I'm going to watch horror movies to face my fears because every time I see a clown, I literally start hyperventilating, that's probably not the way to do it. If it's not, like, you know, there's a professional, like, this could help you become, you know, more comfortable seeing it in the real world, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so... back to if horror movies can actually be good for your mental health. Yes, they have the potential to be used for exposure therapy with a therapist or professional's recommendation. You wouldn't want to just, you know, decide to do that on your own. And it would have to be in an environment you feel comfortable in and not like I don't know if I'd want to watch a scary movie with therapists. Like, that would probably make me... I'd have to, like... you know, sit down with, like, a family member or, like, a friend that I trusted. So, like, if I did freak out, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And using horror movies as, like, an exposure therapy does, for the people that actually, like, get results from it, it can lead to, like, better coping mechanisms if you have anxiety, which also just kind of comes along with exposure therapy in general. So it's not like horror movies are all bad. They're kind of okay.
I have my biases. I may not watch a horror movie after this, but
this is purely, like, informational. Like, if
Yes.
I wanted to persuade you,
Yes, I know.
I'd probably be like, listen, this is so good. It's got this movie, and, like, a trilogy. You just have to see them all. Thinking about the Conjuring movies. Sorry.
I'm not watching this.
No, oh my gosh. It's so funny because the Conjuring movies are, like, my favorite horror movies. They're not even, like, the most scary. I just really liked the first two, but the thing is, the second one messed with me for so long. Just because, like, I may need to cut this out, but, like, nuns. They had this, like, all dolled up, freaky nun. And I don't know what it was. Like, I've seen it, creepy clown makeup. I mean, it's kind of, like, borderline creepy, But this nun, I cannot tell you. And then my friends forced me to watch The Nun, and they were all like playing on their phones, not paying attention. I could not tear my eyes away from the screen. I was like, how'd she die? How'd she die? How did they get rid of her? When did she get I was like, I cannot rest until I know what happens to her.
Maybe you need exposure therapy.
This is, and that's what it was.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you. Oh no, I had to like go online and go on YouTube and look up makeup tutorials for how they did her makeup. Just to like get myself to calm down and go to sleep. Like most other horror movies, I'm fine. Like we watched one this weekend and like it was one of those like crazy persons just like off killing people again. Except it was like kids this time. And like that, I mean, it was like 30 minutes after the movie, you're just kind of like, that was kind of creepy. But like after that, like I didn't have trouble falling asleep. But after Conjuring 2 with the nun, I was like, oh my god. There's something about the way they did her makeup that was just like, it was creepy. Anyways, my last question, I was like, okay, I'm sure this is gonna be really like negative about horror movies, and I like horror movies, so like, are there any other upsides to watching horror movies? And like I told you before, one of the studies showed that like a participant who watched The Shining burned like 200 calories. Like obviously you're not going to burn as many calories as if you were like working out or, you know, running. But just knowing that you're burning a few calories may make you feel a little better throughout the day.
Yeah, like you're just sitting there.
Exactly.
You're just sitting there.
Exactly. Especially like when you know that you're one of those people that will just sit down and like eat food the whole time they're watching something.
Yeah.
Like I've noticed that in my dorm room. I'll sit down and
gosh.
watch something and I'm like, I want food, but I don't even know if I'm hungry. I just like to eat when I'm watching something.
It cancels out. You may burn 200 calories, but you can just eat 200 more, and then it's like nothing happened.
Another upside that I saw was, and we actually started talking about this a little bit, I think in like one of our labs, like watching horror movies with other people can help strengthen your bond.
I have heard of that.
I think we did a lab, and it was talking about like a kid watching a video with an adult.
The research alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't a lab.
Oh,
it was the research
it was a
alternative.
research alternative.
Yeah. Should we provide context?
Okay, so yes, one of the research assignments on Sona, I think it was like article 3 or 4, and yeah, they were talking about how 2.5-year-olds watching like a clip of like, I think it was animals. Was it like animal clips?
Maybe.
With an adult sitting by them can somehow, well not somehow, will like strengthen the bond between them, even if they're like strangers. They'll feel more comfortable than they would have without having that like knowledge that you're sitting there watching something with somebody else. So this is kind of like the same concept. And like, this makes sense to me as well, because like that's what my friend group does, is like we hang out and we watch scary movies and then we're all like inseparable. And I don't know if it's because we're scared or because we have a stronger bond. I like to think it's the latter.
Yeah. And it probably is.
Stronger bonds. Anyways. So that's all the fun stuff that I learned about horror movies, which
Very fun.
somehow doesn't make watching them any scarier, so I guess that's good.
Yeah. I'll probably still stay away from them, but
What scares you about horror movies?
I don't know. It freaks me out. Like,
Is it, I will say, like, watching more paranormal type scary movies, I deal with a lot better than watching ones about, like, actual people just doing really, really, really messed up things.
see, for me, it's both. Like, I get the same amount of fear and anxiety. You mentioned something, it's like, you get that anxiety, but what people like is that relief after. Mm-hmm. I don't get relief. endless suffering after I watch a movie.
I'll be honest, I did not like horror movies at all, but all of my friends really liked them, so I would watch them. And I just watched them to the point where I liked watching them.
Yeah.
So I feel like that exposure therapy thing kind of has like a... What is it like?
Like a positive effect.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a word I'm trying to think of, it's just not coming to me. But, I don't know, I guess that's like my proof that I think it has potential.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. So, what do you got?
Oh, I think. So, remember, we were in psychology class, and it was Fun Fact Friday, and it was about crying. Like, why do we cry?
Yes.
And somebody in class mentioned something like, hey, what about actors? Like, what if they're not really feeling the emotions needed to cry? And I was like, oh, acting. Maybe there's like a psychological aspect behind it. There is.
Really?
Really?
No way.
But before we get into psychology, we're going to delve into history.
Oh.
And it's important, though. It's important. It's important. It's going to be satisfying.
I'll believe you.
So, where do you think acting came from? Do you think it's something that it's in human nature? Do you think someone invented it? Do you think what?
I like to think that it just kind of developed from storytelling. Because I know, like, Greek and Roman people used to, like, do all of those, like, dramatic, like, performances.
Yeah.
Is that...
Okay, so this is... Acting first originated in 6th century BC, ancient Greece.
I hate history, but I know it.
You know it. Now, before then, the Greeks did do their plays, but it wasn't acting. It was, there would be like a chorus and a narrator, but there was never anyone being like, I'm Dave, when they're Andrew, you know?
Yes.
It's just like dancers, a chorus, and a narrator, stuff like that. But then 6th century BC, in ancient Greece, this dude named Thespis came along. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I like thespian.
Thespian, yeah. So, he comes along and he does like acting. Like, not exactly like what we think of Western acting. That didn't come about in like, it didn't come out until like 19th century. But he was still doing the whole, I'm Dave when he's Thespis type of deal.
Yeah.
Now, why is this important? It's because it's not biologically adaptive. So, with acting, I would like to make a point. I'm not talking about things like lying or pretend play. Do you know what pretend play is? I'll tell you.
It's like, I don't want to say.
So, according to Dr. Dina Skolnick-Weisberg, pretend play is a form of playful behavior that involves non-literal action. Although, on the surface, this activity appears to be merely for fun, recent research has discovered that children's pretend play has connections to important cognitive and social skills, such as symbolic thinking, theory of mind, and counterfactual reasoning. So an example is like, if a child comes up to you and it like has a banana and is like, hello, that's pretend play.
Yeah.
Because they're mimicking what they see and they're using what they see to form their own like ways to act in society. It's ingrained in them literally because they do that when they start talking, you know.
Just to like try to copy others to fit in. Almost.
Yeah, because like today was social group in
Like,
psychology.
that's what she was talking about today.
Yeah, today in psychology class it was social group, and it was like you have to act a certain way to fit into the group. Pretend play is learning how to fit into the group by hello on a banana, you know.
Banana phone.
And of course it's not lying either, because lying is So lying aims to deceive,
Mm-hmm.
but with acting, it comes with the presumption that you know that it's an actor. Like, you wouldn't go to a theater and be personally betrayed, by what Hamlet does or Macbeth does, you know? You'd be like, how dare they? You know it's an actor.
Yeah.
So they're not lying, because they're not trying to deceive you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with acting came two schools of thought. One was formed by Dennis Diderot, and he believed that actors should just be totally disconnected from what they're feeling. Like, actors shouldn't really have to feel the emotions their character's feeling. They should be able to do that, and portray the character without digging deep into that level.
Yeah.
The other school of thought is Konstantin Stanislavski. And he is where method acting comes from. So it was the opposite of Diderot. And he believed that actors should experience what the character is feeling.
Yeah. Sounds more accurate.
Yeah. But with method acting, there comes the question of okay, if the actor is feeling the character's emotions, what happens when that person, depending on the character,
Yeah.
What if they dig too deep? Stuff like that.
I feel like that's one of those things where it's a healthy balance. Yes, you need to be able to feel the emotions that the character would be feeling in order to perform the role correctly. But once, cameras are off, you're not on stage, you shouldn't still feel those things.
Yeah.
Especially if they're negative things.
Yeah. And have you ever wondered why method acting takes such a toll? You hear stories of actors who, horror stories for actors, I dove too deep into this character.
Yeah.
I was never the same.
Mm-hmm.
It has, a physical, neurological effect on the brain. Seriously. So there was a study done by the Royal Society Open Science. So they hired actors for their research.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, we're going to ask you some questions. We're going to hook you up to an MRI. And we're just going to see, what happens in your brain. So for some questions, we want you to answer as yourself. How would you do it?
Yeah.
How would you answer? But for others, we want you to answer as if you were a character. So for this study, they did Romeo or Juliet, depending on the gender, So this study found that acting led to deactivations in brain areas involved in self-processing. This might suggest that acting as a neurocognitive phenomenon is a suppression of self-processing. More specifically, though, produced global reductions in brain activity and particularly deactivations in the cortical midline network of the frontal lobe. I'll get to that in a second. Including the dorsomedial and ventromedial prefrontal cortices. Ooh. So that was a little wordy word vomit. But all you need to know is it suppresses the self by affecting the cortical midline network. And you're probably asking, what's the cortical midline network? Are you asking that?
Yeah, I am asking that.
Yeah. So it's a section in your brain that is mainly devoted to the self. It's yourself in the brain. So it's your sense of agency and ownership. The ability to recognize your own face. So everything about you can be found in there.
So do you think that narcissistic people just have a slightly bigger than average?
Ooh, I don't know. Next podcast.
Yeah, no, now I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah. But, so another example, with the cortical midline network, if you get a lesion on there, it can cause, what's it called? I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Anosognosia. So it's unaware of a psychological condition. So, like dementia.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cortical midline network. And then it has somatognosia, being unable to identify a part of your body as your own. So people will like, this isn't my hand. Even though it is, this isn't my hand.
Oh.
It's because the cortical midline network is
Being mean.
Yeah.
You big fat bully.
So this just shows that when you're acting, you're suppressing yourself, like literally. Like literally.
Yeah.
Physically. Like it's just so cool. Like, and like you can see it on the MRIs, like in the study. Like, it's just not as activated. When they were playing Romeo or Juliet, it was like they were physically suppressing themselves.
Makes me wonder about like narcissistic actors. Does it just bring it down to like a regular amount of like selfishness, or
I don't know. Maybe it's hand in hand though, because you know actors who do method acting may be a little
valid?
Maybe there's a correlation.
There might be.
Did we discover something?
Probably not. This could be common knowledge for all I know.
Ooh.
You kind of live under a rock.
Yeah, and we're freshmen. They probably
love.
But now with all this talk about like suppression of this area of the brain when you act, it's easy to see how it can affect you if you go too far with method acting. So when someone does method acting too far, they can create a dissonance between their actions and their actual feelings. So this causes a lot of like psychological problems. It causes anxiety, psychosis. I'll get to that. So clinical and forensic psychologist Raymond Hamden said that the dissonance between actions and feelings formed from acting can cause sleep deprivation, anger, depression, and anxiety. It can even cause psychosis. So psychosis is a general term used to describe a mental state of dysfunction in behavior and thought process. The mental capacity is grossly distorted and thought is disorganized. This causes an inability to recognize reality or relate to others in meaningful ways. Pretty bad.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. So I have a real life example.
Oh.
Have you ever watched Man on the Moon?
I don't think so.
Okay. Have you heard of Jim Carrey?
Yes. Yes, I've heard of Jim Carrey.
Okay, well he plays an actor. It's a biopic, and he plays Andy Kaufman, and Andy Kaufman was a comedian. And one of his bits was like he was Andy Kaufman, but he also played a character called Tony Clifton.
So he played like a character within a character?
Jim Carrey did.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting.
So to prepare for this role, Jim Carrey never broke character.
That actually makes a strange kind of sense because, like, not only do you have to play one character, you then have to play, like, a character playing a character.
No, but here's the thing. It wasn't just that. He was playing Andy and Tony as two separate people. But he would switch. So, there was, this is from the documentary Jim and Andy. It's on Netflix. And like Jim Carrey, this was 2017 and he was open. He was like, yeah, this is what I did. So I made sure not to tread on any boundaries because, you know, sometimes method acting can be a little touchy and I didn't want to be insensitive. But since Jim was like, this is what I did, I was like, okay, that's perfect. There was a scene, so Jim, he switched to, he was Andy in this scene. And he was like, I can't believe I have to come in tomorrow. Oh, wait, I'm not coming in tomorrow. I have the day off. Tony's coming in. Like, he said that.
Because he didn't have to, like, act as the one guy. He had to act as the other.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of confusion between yourself and, like, two people who have nothing to do with you, really.
Yeah. And then there was another clip. Jim was talking about how the director called Jim during filming. He made sure he was talking to Jim too, because like he would never break character on set. Never. But the director made sure to call Jim and speak to him, and he was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do about Andy and Tony. And do you know what Jim said? He said, well, maybe you should fire them, and you know, I think I can do a pretty good impression of them.
There's some people that you just, like, things they say you just love. I mean, honestly.
And I have a ton of notes that I found from this documentary. Because, like, from the way Jim was speaking, like, you know he genuinely didn't know that he... Like, he was mentally...
I thought he was saying that, like...
No, he was
ironically.
Mentally...
No,
He was not well during this.
Oh my gosh.
Like, it was awful. But, like, even during the documentary, whenever Jim would talk about his past, like, something he did as Andy or Tony, he would refer to him as, like, oh yeah, he did this.
Like, almost in, like, third person.
Yeah. He wasn't speaking in first person to talk about his past self. He said he. Yeah, like, he did this. Andy did this.
Interesting. So that makes me wonder if, like, even after, like, all that time, he still kind of, like, almost sees that, like, himself in that time frame as being a different person still.
Yeah. I know he doesn't think about himself now as, like, still having a part of him, because he said he did not miss Tony at all. I don't know about Andy, but he said he did not miss Tony at all.
Interesting.
Another thing, okay, like, you know the person who asked the questions in a documentary? I don't know the name of it, but the person behind the camera.
I was gonna sneeze, sorry.
Oh my... Well, he asked Jim, like, now, was Tony actually drinking? Because Jim was drinking on set as Tony. Because, like, he was an alcoholic. The character was an alcoholic, but Jim he picked up drinking because of this. And Jim said, oh, I don't know if he was actually drinking, but he stunk. And I was like, oh my gosh.
That's wild, dude. Like...
He even said he dreamt, like, his dreams consisted of him, Tony, and Andy all wrestling.
Did they look like him?
I don't know. Okay, this was the one that rubbed me, like, the wrong way. So, Andy's family, Andy has passed away at this point. Andy's family came by on set, and Jim would speak to them as Andy.
That makes me kind of uncomfy.
It does.
Imagine being, like, the family member of somebody who's passed and just, like, have somebody walk up to you basically pretending to be, like, your deceased loved one. Like, did he say how they reacted to that?
I mean... He was reminiscing as if it was, like, a positive experience. Because in the documentary, they were hugging.
Interesting.
And, like, Jim would be like, is that Dad? Like, whenever he would see Andy's father. And then he would hug him. And then he even said that he didn't know what was real or not real. Like, he genuinely believed that was his family.
It is terrifying. See, you know what's funny is all of this is starting to sound like a psychological thriller. Like a horror movie. Just saying. I'm just saying.
So, after filming, Jim does put off the characters.
Yeah.
He kind of, like, just throws them out. But he got, like, major anxiety after.
Really?
Because he was talking about how, like, he wasn't Jim for months. He was literally just Andy and Tony, so he didn't have Jim's problems. So when he became Jim again, and he had all, like, his own problems, he became, like, anxious and depressed. And
was that stuff that he struggled with before, like, diving so deep into these characters? Or was it just an after effect of, like, not really knowing who he was, or, like...
It was an after effect, though it may have something to do with... Maybe he was, like, previously... Maybe he previously had anxiety. I think his father died maybe a year before.
Okay.
I don't know, but he said... Like, he literally said in the documentary... After filming, he didn't know who he was. He didn't know what his politics were. He literally couldn't remember who he was.
That just sounds terrifying. I mean, I don't know if I would put myself through that for, like, any amount of money.
He won the Golden Globe. Is it worth it?
I mean, I guess it depends on how much you want it. I don't think it would be worth it.
No.
I guess he did. I don't know. I mean, and that's not even, like, the most recent thing he's been in, is it?
No, he was in Sonic.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he's done acting since then.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be able to recover from something like that.
No.
Especially, like, when did Sonic come out? Do you know?
Is that... The second one came out last year, right?
Was he in that too?
I don't know my Sonic lore.
I haven't seen either, so
Yeah.
I don't know either. But when did the first one come out? Like, what?
2020? 2019?
Yeah, so really, like, 2-3 years later, he was right back into acting.
Oh, this is in 1999.
Girl, I thought you said 2017.
The documentary was in 2017. Oh my
Oh.
gosh. This is
I
going to be
was
so
like-
confusing for people.
That's
My bad.
crazy. Do you know when The Grinch came out?
After, it was like 2001, 2003?
Was it? Let me see. Because
I know he got like claustrophobia from the suit. So he was
The
just
Grinch
not having
suit?
he was not having a good time these few years. He made set miserable for other people too.
Did he really?
Yeah, it was
How
He-
so?
he like this one dude specifically. Okay, hold on. Where should I start? So Andy Kaufman had this bit with this wrestler that they were like beefing always, that they were just rivalries.
Yeah.
But like behind the scenes, they were actually friends.
Mhm.
Jim didn't know that apparently, and used their stage dynamic in real life, and he was just constantly harassing this man,
Like the guy who played the other character.
the guy who was the wrestler.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they got the wrestler back on to be in the movie. I'm jumping. I keep leaving out details. But the old wrestler that Andy Kaufman, like, had beef with and played with came back for the movie. Jim didn't know they were actually friends in real life and used their stage dynamic as real life.
So was this like an actor playing the wrestler, or like the actual?
The actual wrestler.
Oh wow, that's uncomfy.
And Jim, as Andy, was just tormenting him. He tormented him to the point where the wrestler, I think, he had to go to the hospital.
The wrestler had to go to the hospital?
No, Jim had to go to the hospital because he was
Oh.
taunting him so much, the wrestler,
Hit
got
him.
his neck.
Yeah.
And he was in a neck brace thing for a while.
Gosh. I looked up the Grinch movie that came out in 2000.
That's 1 year after, I think.
That's crazy. That's still like not as much time as like I would probably need to recover from something like that.
Yeah. But you can see like the cortical midline network working. with this example, you know, because
Yeah,
Jim suppressed the self so much
that he did not know who he was after that.
Yeah. I would have. I don't want to take advantage of him, but it would have been cool to like have a MRI done on him.
Yeah.
You know, during this time.
Yeah, no.
Because like I do feel bad for him. I feel bad for everyone in this situation. I think he shouldn't have gone that far, but I don't think what happened to him at the end was like all his fault. I don't think you can control. You can't control like.
I feel like it's one of those things once you start, it's just kind of like a rabbit hole that you don't know how to like crawl out of until it's over and done with.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't think he's had an experience like that since then. Not quite that bad.
I don't think he's ever method acted ever again. I don't think.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
I mean, obviously, like, it showed him some things, and he'll probably stray away from that, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to watch The Grinch.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talk about The Grinch if we ever do another podcast. Talk about narcissists and The Grinch.
Oh my gosh, yes! The Christmas-themed episode.
Because he's literally narcissistic, too. This is just all falling together.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Perfect.
Even the link between horror movies and your scary method acting
Yes.
story.
Oh my gosh.
I swear, I've seen some, like, psychological thrillers that aren't even, like, they didn't seem as bad as that story did. Like, that story
Yeah.
it has potential to be freaky.
Yeah, I want to see if I left out anything, because that documentary was an hour and a half. You can only imagine what went down.
Yeah, I know. I feel like you are like packed full of information.
No.
I was like, I have questions that I'm gonna answer.
Honestly,
Uh,
I liked yours better.
I thought yours was cool though, because you kind of like went into the history behind the whole thing, and then like kind of said how it developed.
That's because that's how my research went.
Oh.
Like, that's the way it's like laid out in my script. That's how I was researching. So like you can see.
It's kind of similar to what I did. Like you started somewhere and just like kept moving, and
Yes.
that's kind of like what I did with the questions. But I didn't. I mean, because like horror movies haven't been like a forever long thing. Like they
Yeah.
weren't around at the beginning of acting and like theater and all that. But I kind of just like was like, this makes sense. Like this is a good question to ask, and I kind of just branched off from there. I don't know. I think we may have pulled it together enough to do a successful podcast.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, post it to Spotify. Get 1 billion listeners.
God, please don't.
Get on the talk show.
Like the one day I sound like I'm so like nasally.
You really don't sound bad. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't notice anything if you hadn't said anything. She has allergies, for context.
I do. No, and there was one point when you were talking where I like almost sneezed, and I was just like,
I remember.
oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think that just about does it. We're at like almost 50 minutes now.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we were like,
It
we're gonna
didn't
do
feel
20
that-
minutes.
It didn't feel that long at all. All right. Well, I hope whoever ends up grading this enjoyed listening to us talk and ramble about psychology and
Yeah.
horror movies and method acting.
Yeah, we hope we didn't bore you.
Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna hit the red button now.